Imagine crossing Central America by water on a route almost 3 times longer than the Panama Canal, capable of accommodating the largest ships ever built by mankind. A water corridor so ambitious that it could redraw global trade routes and alter the strategic balance on the American continent. Now imagine that this same project is being proposed by one of the poorest countries in the region. It sounds doubtful, I know that, but this is Nicaragua's proposal. To build an interoceanic canal approximately 278 kilometers long with an estimated investment of $50 billion, an amount that exceeds more than 3 times the country's annual gross domestic product. If completed, the Nicaragua Canal would not just be an alternative to Panama. It could become one of the largest infrastructure projects in modern history, with a direct impact on global trade, the geopolitics of the Americas, and the strategic rivalry between the major powers. But is this colossal project really feasible? Or are we facing one of the most ambitious and risky projects of the 21st century? That's what we're going to find out in this video. Nicaragua is located in the heart of Central America, bordered to the north by Honduras, to the south by Costa Rica, and to the west by the Pacific Ocean, by the Caribbean Sea. This strategic position has always attracted the interest of engineers and international powers seeking a connection between the 2 largest oceans on the planet. The proposed route for the canal would be about 278 kilometers long. For comparison, the Panama Canal is approximately 82 kilometers long. This means that the Nicaraguan project would be more than 3 times longer. But it's not just the length that's impressive. The canal was designed to have an average depth of 27 to 30 meters. This depth would allow ships with up to 400,000 tons of displacement to pass through, including supertankers and ultra-large container vessels. The planned width reaches over 500 meters in some sections. That's equivalent to placing 4 soccer fields side by side within the navigable section. But that's not all. Because one of the central points of the project is Lake Nicaragua, the largest lake in Central America, covering about 8,264 square kilometers. To give you an idea of this size, we're talking about a surface area larger than the entire federal district of Brazil. In addition, the plan calls for the canal to cross the lake for approximately 105 kilometers, making it an integral part of the interoceanic route. However, to make the project even more interesting, 2 deep water ports, an international airport, industrial zones, a parallel oil pipeline, and complementary railway infrastructure were proposed. In other words, it wouldn't just be a canal, it would be an extremely massive continental logistics complex, something much bigger than the Panama Canal. But how did this idea of challenging Panama's dominance come about? The idea of an interoceanic canal in Nicaragua wasn't born in the 21st century. In fact, it's older than the Panama Canal itself. At the beginning of the 19th century, when the great powers were searching for faster routes between the Atlantic and the Pacific, Nicaragua was considered one of the most viable options for this strategic connection. Lake Nicaragua was seen as a natural route. It already offered a huge mass of fresh water inside the territory, reducing the need for continuous excavation. For decades, American engineers studied the possibility of using the lake as part of the interoceanic route. In fact, before the final decision for Panama, Nicaragua was considered the favorite. But there was an obstacle. The region is marked by immense volcanic activity. Volcanoes like Momotombo have become symbols of the area's geological risk. Panama was chosen, and Central America's logistical future was set. During the 20th century, the Panama Canal became established as one of the most strategic points in world trade. Just to give you an idea, currently about 3 to 6% of all global trade passes through there. But the growth of maritime trade has completely changed the scale of global navigation. The ships have gotten bigger, much bigger. The expansion of the Panama Canal, completed in 2016, allowed the passage of vessels with a capacity of approximately 14,000 TEUs, which are units equivalent to 20-foot containers. However, the shipbuilding industry is already working with ships that exceed 20,000 TEUs. In other words, even after being expanded, the Panama Canal still has physical limitations. This is exactly when the Nicaragua project returns to the picture. In 2013, the government of President Daniel Ortega granted a 50-year license renewable for another 50 years to the company HKND Group, led by the Chinese businessman Wang Jing. The announcement had an immediate impact. The estimated investment was $50 billion. To put this in perspective, Nicaragua's annual GDP is around $15 billion. In other words, the project would represent more than 3 times the entire national economy. For this to work, there was an even more sensitive factor: Chinese involvement. Amid the growing geopolitical dispute between the United States and China, an interoceanic canal financed by Chinese capital in Central America would not just be an infrastructure project. It would be a strategic statement. And when infrastructure mixes with geopolitics, the game stops being just technical. It becomes global. But political ambition doesn't build a canal. The real challenge begins when engineering comes into play, and that's when the project reveals its most impressive dimension. If the Nicaragua Canal gets off the ground, it won't just be a canal bigger than the Panama Canal. It will be one of the largest earth-moving projects in the history of modern engineering. Preliminary studies indicate that the project would require the removal of more than 5 billion cubic meters of earth and sediment. For comparison, the recent expansion of the Panama Canal removed about 150 million cubic meters, and the Nicaraguan project would require more than 30 times that amount. If that amount of material were transported by regular 20 cubic meter trucks, it would take about 250 million trips. The 278-kilometer route includes different types of terrain, dense tropical forests, swampy areas, regions with unstable soil, and zones near seismic faults. And Lake Nicaragua, with average depths between 8 and 26 meters. In addition to all that, the plan calls for about 105 kilometers of the canal to cross Lake Nicaragua. This would require a drainage operation on a scale never seen before in Latin America. And this is where the first major structural risk emerges. Lake Nicaragua is not just a navigable body of water. It is the largest natural freshwater reservoir in Central America. Any change here in the sediment balance can increase turbidity, alter aquatic ecosystems, compromise water quality, and make it easier for fuel contamination to occur. In addition, large ships operate with heavy fuels. A single spill could affect thousands of square kilometers. But the difficulties go beyond that. Just like the Panama Canal, the Nicaragua project includes lock systems to raise and lower ships along the route. Each set of locks would be approximately 520 meters long, 75 meters wide, and 27 to 30 meters deep. For comparison, that's bigger than 2 football fields placed end to end. That's why each lock operation would use about 190 million liters of fresh water per passage, a value similar to what the Panama Canal uses. If the canal handled 15 ships per day, that could mean using almost 3 billion liters of water daily. And unlike Panama, which has a more established water system, Nicaragua would face greater challenges during periods of drought. But that's not all. There's still another more complex and important factor to be discussed. One concerning thing is that Nicaragua is located near the so-called Pacific Ring of Fire, a region responsible for about 75% of the planet's active volcanoes. The country experiences frequent seismic activity. This means that the structures of the locks and dams would have to be designed to withstand earthquakes above magnitude 7 on the Richter scale. Therefore, deep reinforced foundations, structural damping systems, ultra-high-strength reinforced concrete, and expansion joints capable of absorbing millimetric displacements would be necessary. In projects of this magnitude, displacements of just a few centimeters can compromise structural integrity. In other words, we're talking about a canal that doesn't just need to carry ships, but actually survive the region's own geology. In addition, it's estimated that the project would consume millions of tons of concrete and structural steel. For comparison, the expansion of the Panama Canal used about 4.5 million cubic meters of concrete. The Nicaragua Canal could surpass that number due to its larger scale. However, there's still the issue of the ports and additional infrastructure included in the project. A deep water port in the Pacific, another in the Caribbean industrial zones, a parallel oil pipeline, and of course a complementary railway. This means that the canal would not require just a maritime corridor. It would be an integrated logistics corridor. And it's exactly at this point that the tension starts to rise. Because when maritime infrastructure becomes a strategic corridor, it stops being just commercial. It becomes geopolitical. If the Nicaragua Canal had gotten off the ground, the economic impact would have been immediate. During the construction phase, estimates pointed to something between 40,000 and 50,000 direct jobs, in addition to thousands of indirect positions in logistics, transportation, food, and services. For a country with about 6.5 million inhabitants, this would represent a structural transformation in the economy. The government projected that the GDP could grow at a rapid pace for more than a decade, driven by foreign investments and revenue from the creation of industrial zones around the canal. A second interoceanic canal would reduce global dependence on Panama, increase capacity for ultra-large ships, and could lower costs on certain trade routes. In a scenario of continuous growth in maritime trade, this would mean more competitiveness for carriers and exporters. However, each benefit comes with a proportional cost. Lake Nicaragua, the country's main freshwater reservoir, would be at the center of the operation. Experts warn that changes in water quality could impact fishing, agriculture, and drinking water supply. In addition, thousands of people living along the proposed route could be displaced. We're not just talking about engineering. We're talking about territorial transformation. And there's also the less visible but perhaps more decisive impact, the financial impact. The project depends on massive funding and prolonged political stability. Without solid investors, international guarantees, and regulatory stability, a project of this magnitude simply cannot be sustained. And that's exactly what started to happen. The initial enthusiasm faded. The years went by. The main excavators never moved forward. And in 2024, the original concession was officially canceled by the Nicaraguan Congress. The canal that promised to divide the continent still hasn't even cut through the first major stretch of land. But that doesn't mean the project is dead. It means it has entered the most unpredictable zone of modern engineering, the zone where infrastructure meets geopolitics. Thank you for watching this video so far. What do you think about the project to build this major infrastructure in Nicaragua? Would it be a great rival to Panama? Would it be interesting for us, the consumers? Or is it just a canal caught in the rivalry between the United States and China? Leave your opinion here in the comments. I'll be happy to read all of them. That's it for now. Sending you a big hug and see you in the next video.